With the 4 core factions in Rome Total War, the board game, repeated campaigns can start to follow similar patterns. Carthage often isolated in the south, Macedonia established in the east, confrontation and alliances forming along familiar lines. Over time, that can reduce replay variety from one game to the next. By adding more playable factions on the map and increasing the starting options, the upcoming faction booster will greatly improve replayability, bringing the enjoyment of the board game to its peak. However, we are still waiting for it. For my latest 2-player campaign, I wanted to reach that fuller strategic intensity right away, with more factions on the board and more moving parts in play. With my partner, we wanted to play a 2-player game on half a map, playing as Rome and Carthage, and adding 3 more bot factions on the map, using the little bot system presented in the last video. The Gallic Tribes, a faction from the core game, and the Iberian Tribes and the German Tribes, which are not yet available without the faction booster expansion. To do that, I set up a simple temporary solution. 2 homemade bot factions, the Iberian Tribes and the German Tribes, created for my personal use only. Adding them let me run a fuller map with more rival powers and a richer overall gameplay experience during this playthrough. And you will see in that 2-player playthrough that those 2 additional factions and the bot system really bring the game to its peak. In this video, I'll present these 2 custom factions, their unit names, visual identity, dice colors, and special effects. If you want to know how they functioned as AI-controlled factions in the 2-player playthrough you're about to watch, I invite you to check the last video. Once again, this is just a temporary homemade solution, waiting for the official booster expansion to come, and today, I'll walk you through it. I know a small table was shared on GameFound, but it looks to me a bit preliminary, so I took the liberty of exploring other options. Also, please keep in mind that this is a kind of a first version, so I may modify what I have done later, especially if I find that the balance is not good enough. For the German and Iberian factions, I decided that they should be tribal factions, which means they will share some similarities with the Gallic tribes, such as no artillery units, the same need for unification, and hence the same constraint about mixing the tribal units. Overall, those constraints should be somehow compensated for with bigger starting armies and inexpensive units, and finally they should have no fleet at first and at best mediocre fleets. I was also thinking that you should feel the diversity when playing the different tribes, so that those 3 tribes should have different qualities and shortcomings on the battlefield. At the end, I decided that the German tribe's strength will be infantry units and archers. They will receive slightly better infantry than the 2 other tribes, and will have the best terrain archers of the game. They will also have slightly better skirmishers than the Gallic tribes, but will be limited in the number of skirmishers, just like the Gallic tribes. As a shortcoming, they will have almost no cavalry units, only the same noble cavalry as the Gallic tribes, but that is a unit that they will need to unlock on their tech tree later in the game, and they will have no cavalry skirmishers. Please keep in mind, however, that the German tribes start close enough to mercenary cavalry regions, such as Scythia or Sarmatia. On the other hand, the Iberian strength should be cavalry units. They will start the game with strong cavalry units, and will be able to unlock elite ones on their tech tree. Also, they will have slightly better skirmishers than the Gallic tribes, and will be the only tribal faction having 8 skirmishers in its deck, hence being able to fill all of its armies with 2 skirmishers. In the middle of those 2 tribes, the Gallic tribes should then appear as the most balanced tribal faction, being the best nowhere, but having solid options everywhere. And now for the army composition. For both the German and the Iberian, I decided to get inspiration from the rosters of Rome Total War 2. Ready? On the infantry side, at first I have selected the Club Levy, the Wolf Warriors, the Berserkers, the Night Hunters, and the Swordmasters. Then it looks to me that the Wolf Warriors and the Berserkers were a bit redundant, so at the end I only kept the Wolf Warriors. For the archers, of course, I have selected the Longbow Hunters, and then on the skirmisher side I have selected the Germanic Slingers, the Horse Runners, and the Germanic Youth. And finally, for the cavalry unit, I have selected the Noble Cavalry. Well, I am not sure it is the most historical roster, but for sure it is a fun one. So, at the end we have 4 different kinds of infantry: Club Levies, Wolf Warriors, Night Hunters, and Swordmasters. 1 archer and 3 skirmishers. Longbows, slingers, horse runners, and Germanic youths. And finally, only one cavalry unit, the noble cavalry. Okay, now we need a bit of tribal feeling there. Just like we have lowland and highland warriors that the Gallic tribes cannot mix before unification, we need to label some units with a tribe name so that they cannot mix or stand next to each other at the beginning. I decided to label the club levies as Suebi club levies, and both the longbow and horse runners as Charusai longbow and Charusai horse runners. Those Suebi and Charusai units will not be allowed to mix before unification is reached. Now let's have a look at the unit cards. And let's start with the Suebi club levy. Yes, when I have said that the German tribes have slightly better infantry than the tribes, I was not talking about those Suebi club levies. But hold on, more infantry units are coming. Those Suebi club levies are actually among the worst units in the game. The comparison basis may be the Gallic lowland warriors, but in that case the lowland warriors dominate them with their special effect. You may also compare them to the cheap, expendable units that other factions use to conquer independent regions such as the Italian infantry, the Libyan spearmen, or the hoplites. In that case, the Suebi club levies have both worse dice, and are not proper spearmen, meaning they have no special effect voiding damage from cavalry. Actually, their loose formation makes them vulnerable to most cavalry units, which is not the case for the lowland warriors, who, with their flexible formation, will be more resilient against cavalry. The veteran version is not much better, being largely dominated by the lowland warriors, and by the three other cheap units from Rome, Carthage, and Macedonia. Now let's talk about the wolf warrior. This unit won't be available from turn 1, and should be compared to the Gallic naked GCT. You will be able to develop it in the first spending turn, and recruit it at best from the second spending turn. Well, it is an equivalent unit on difficult terrain, and the wolf warriors will have better dice but no special effect on open ground. If you compare them to difficult terrain units from other factions, they are equivalent to the Imperial Auxiliary, and have better dice but slightly weaker special effect than the Hispanic Scutari or the Highland Warriors. However, all three units may upgrade to veteran, which is not the case for the wolf warrior. So, the wolf warrior is a good enough terrain unit that you may recruit fast enough, but its main shortcoming is that it won't be able to get veteran status. And we now move to the Night Hunters. If you only look at the dice, it may look like a weak unit, but they have powerful voiding effect active against every kind of cavalry and chariot, and the veteran version can void any damage against close formation units, making it more resilient against the Roman legion. That said, the fact that they are always rolling 2 dice gives them a good enough chance of rolling their special. It is for sure not the most lethal unit, but it should be a resilient one, still with a good enough chance of inflicting some wounds. Finally, they are flexible units, making them more resilient against cavalry charge. They are not really spearmen, but if you have to compare them to other factions' units, I think you should pick the citizen spearmen, the phalanx, and the Italian infantry. On the dice, they are weaker than all of those units, but with once again an interesting special effect, and especially once they get promoted to veteran. And finally, the most elite infantry unit of the German tribes, and so far in the game, the Swordmasters. Well, the main basis of comparison for that unit should be the Gallic Soldiery, which they dominate with a white die on every terrain, increasing both the chance of killing and activating their wide special effect. Like the Soldiery, it is a unit available from turn 1, making it extremely powerful. If you compare it with Roman infantry, it is a good match for both of their legionaries and their praetorians. It may, however, suffer a bit against the veteran version of the legionaries. Finally, you may compare them to the Carthaginian Sacred Band, and elite mercenary infantry units such as the Thracian Romphamen and the Hispanic Scutari, both in their base and veteran versions. We now move to another German elite unit, the Charusai longbows. You may notice they have a special effect killing any type of flexible and loose formation and any kind of skirmisher and chariot. Once again, rolling 2 dice should help them roll a special, and still gives them a decent chance of either wounding or killing. If you compare them to the other archers of the game, the Roman ones, the Egyptian one, and the mercenary one, you will notice they dominate on both dice and special, and are still efficient on difficult terrain. The Roman archer, however, has a special effect killing any kind of bowman. Will it be a good counter against those German tribes? The veteran version still dominates other archers with a wider special effect and good efficiency on difficult terrain. Now to the skirmishers. Well, the German slinger is a very common one. Weaker than the Gallic one, but in line with the Rhodian or the Carthaginian Balearic slinger. Not much to say here, those slingers are here to take the hit and maybe inflict a wound, like every other slinger. The Charusai horse runners stand out with their special effect. They are a good anti-cavalry skirmisher, and you may also notice they keep a good enough die on good terrain, if you compare them to other javelin men. They are the only useless javelin men against war elephants, however. Last German skirmisher, the Germanic youths. I still feel it is a solid one if you compare it to its Gallic counterparts, with a special effect efficient against every kind of skirmisher. And finally, the only German cavalry, the noble one, which is basically the same as the Gallic one. It is not a starting unit, and will be developed on the last column of the tech board. German tribes may, however, consider invading Scythia or Samartia if they want to reinforce their cavalry roster. At the end we have a roster with 45 unit cards including 7 veteran units, which is the same number as the Gallic tribes, Carthage or Macedonia, Rome being a bit different because of the imperial deck. Among the 38 non-veteran units, 9 of them will require tech development, so won't be available from turn 1, which is less than other decks, as the Gallic tribes having 12 units not available from the first turn, Carthage 11 and Macedonia 15. Finally, the German tribes only count 6 skirmisher units, the same number as Gallic tribes, so they will never be able to have full skirmishers in all of their armies, a problem shared with the Gallic tribes. I feel it is a good enough mix between expandable units, such as the Swaby Club levies, weak but resilient ones, such as the Night Hunters, and elite units such as the Sword Masters or the Charusai Longbow. So far, I have only used them as bot armies, but I would be curious to use them as a regular player. I am not sure about balance. It looks good enough for me, but I should play them entirely to answer that question. I may totally rework them, or adjust their unit cards a bit. If I had to do a tech board for them, I would mix some elements from the Gallic tribes and Dacia. First, they would have the tribes line with reduced antipathy, peaceful agriculture, and national unity. Then the classical agent line. At the top, the military line, developing the Wolf Warrior, Hearthguard giving a free Sword Master if available with each new general, and the Noble Cavalry. Then the naval tech. And finally, from Dacia Forest Ambush, adding 1 terrain to each fight with trees, secure flanks, shared with both the Gallic tribes and Dacia, and from Dacia again hidden troops, giving no reveal in a fight with terrain. A cleaner version would give this tech board, but once again just using them as bots, you actually do not need a proper faction board. Okay, that's all for the German. And it is now time to talk about the Iberian tribes. Once again, I started back from the Rome Total War II roster, looking at Eravasi and Lusitani units. On the infantry side, I have selected the Painted Warriors, the Guerrilla Warriors, the Scutari Spearmen, and the Noble Fighters. On the skirmishers side, I have selected the Iberian Slingers, the Iberian Skirmishers, and the Cantabrian Cavalry. And finally, on the cavalry side, I have selected the Iberian Cavalry, the Celtiberian Cavalry, and the Noble Cavalry. Okay, once again we need a bit of tribal feeling here, right? The Painted Warriors became Eravasi Painted Warriors, and the Slingers became Eravasi Slingers, which will be a kind of lowland tribes. Those 2 units should not mix with the Lusitani Guerrilla Warriors, and the Lusitani Javelin Men that will be part of the Highland tribes, performing better on terrain elements. So, it does not apply for the bot, but if we play those factions as human players, the Eravasi and Lusitani should not be mixed until you achieve national unity. Also, I was looking at the cavalry units and I found it a bit stupid to have an Iberian cavalry and a Celtiberian cavalry. I mean, frankly, I am not at all an expert on that, so maybe the names make sense, but still, I find it a bit stupid. Also, when I was working on the Cantabrian Cavalry, initially a skirmisher, I made it a beautiful horse archer. Maybe it does not make sense from a historical point of view, but I find it fun, and then it finally became a main battle card unit. I then just switched the Cantabrian Cavalry inside the main battle cavalry cards, to take the Iberian one into the skirmishers and rename it as Iberian Light Cavalry. And now, it is time to have a look at the unit cards. We will start with the infantry and Remember, it is not the strength of the Iberian units. So don't be too disappointed. The skirmishers and the cavalry are coming soon. And we start with the Aravasi painted warrior. They are beautiful with their tribal paintings, their falcata and their ketra, but yes, they are quite a weak unit, and the veteran version will be at best non-veteran Italian infantry. If you compare them to the cheap, expendable units other factions will use to conquer independent regions, you may notice that once again they are not spearmen and are loose formation units, so they will be especially vulnerable to cavalry charges, just as the Swaby Club levies. If you narrow the comparison to tribal factions, the Gallic lowland has an advantage, both because of its special effect, and because it is a flexible formation unit, hence a bit more resistant. Regarding the veteran version, both the painted warrior and the club levies are still quite weak. With its green dye, the club levies will be slightly more lethal, but will have less chance to wound, while the painted warrior will perform better in terrain elements. Now to the Lusitani guerrilla warrior, who will be a better fit for fighting in terrain elements. The veteran version improves both the dice and the special effect. Yes, it is a good enough terrain unit, but it is definitely weaker than most of the terrain units of other factions, with the exception of the Illyrian infantry. Also, here I used the Imperial Auxiliary for the Romans, but I could have used the Italian infantry, that the Lusitani guerrilla warrior will slightly dominate. Of course, due to their starting location, the Iberian tribes would easily access Scalabus and the mercenary Hispanic Scutari, who will be costly but efficient units, both in the open field and in terrain elements. Against the German wolf warrior, the guerrilla warrior will have the advantage of a veteran version, but will still stay weaker. Now to the spearmen. The Iberian tribes will have the Scutari spearmen that can match the very basic units such as the Libyan spearmen, the hoplites, or the night hunter, but will be a weaker match against serious spearmen, such as the citizen spearmen or the phalanx, especially because it cannot upgrade to a veteran version. You may notice that its special effect, canceling any kind of cavalry or chariot, is available in any kind of terrain. Well, I am not sure if it will be super useful as you barely fight cavalry or chariot in terrain elements, but still, it is a feature that the Scutari spearman shares with the night hunter. And now to finish these disappointing infantry units. The noble fighter. Compared to the other elite infantry from the tribes, it is as costly, but still the weaker one, has the same special effect but the worse dice. Of course, if you compare it with some other infantry units from the mercenary deck or the Roman roster, it remains weak and cannot upgrade to veteran. Okay. Now to the skirmishers, and it will start to get better for the Iberian tribes. They have a quite good Aravasi slingers, with their green dye in open field. It is definitely the best slinger of the game, only matched by the mercenary Balearic slinger, that the Iberian tribes may easily control from their starting location. Their Lusitani javelin men should also stand among the best javelin men of the game, but they will be of course match up with the Roman Velites and with the special effect of the Charusai horse runners. Finally, the Iberian tribes start with a cavalry skirmisher available from scratch, and have enough skirmishers in their deck to fill all armies, which is not the case of the two other tribes. It is a normal cavalry skirmisher, with the Gallic pony rider being a bit weak, and the mercenary Numidian cavalry being the only one able to upgrade to veteran status. So, poor infantry, very good skirmishers, what about the cavalry now? The Iberian tribes will start with the Celtiberian cavalry, a good enough cavalry that will be able to add a black die everywhere when it gets veteran status. If you compare it to the Carthaginian Hispanic cavalry, the Roman allied cavalry, the Gallic heavy one, or the Macedonian Thessalian one, it is not outstanding, but it is solid enough. Compared to the Gallic, the Iberian tribes will also have the advantage of having that cavalry available from scratch. The veteran version is a bit weaker than the Carthaginian, Roman, and Macedonian alternatives, but it is not a huge difference, and remember the base version is cheaper. And now for the first cavalry that can be developed on the tech tree, the Cantabrian cavalry. Well, it is the only horse archer available in the game other than the mercenary Scythian one. It has a strong special effect that voids any damage from infantry with either AX or a special, and also kills any chariot or skirmisher, so quite a powerful one, especially the veteran version who will roll 2 dice, strongly increasing the probability of triggering its special effect. If you compare it to the Scythian horse archer, the non-veteran Scythian has better chances of triggering its special effect, but the veteran Cantabrian will have slightly better dice on terrain elements. And now to the last and most elite cavalry unit of the Iberian tribes, a unit they will unlock in the third column of their tech tree, the noble cavalry. If you compare it to the two other tribal noble cavalry units, it is the best one, with better dice and a slightly better special effect. If you compare it to other elite cavalry units, it is the same as the Praetorian cavalry, and slightly better than the base version of the pony and the companion, with the difference that the companion can evolve into a veteran version. And here we are with our full roster of the Iberian tribes. Once again, 45 units in total, including 7 veterans, and 6 units that you need to unlock on the tech tree. That 6 units is a low number compared to other factions, so those Iberian tribes will be the faction with the most diversity in unit recruitment at start. For the faction tree, it will be very similar to the German one. Replace Wolf Warriors by Cantabrian Cavalry, and Forest Ambush by Mountain Ambush. And that's all. I hope you have enjoyed this little faction unpacking of the German and Iberian tribes, and if you are curious to see how they stand on the battlefield, if they are able to be a match for Rome or Carthage, then do not miss my next video, the beginning of the 2-player playthrough that I will share next Thursday. And if you have watched the video so far, consider hitting that little subscribe button. That really motivates me. In any case, see you in the next video.